Okay, so why don't you tell me a little bit about Sorted Books and how long you've been doing this project?
So the Sorted Books project started in 1993, and it's actually to date one of the longest running projects, ongoing projects that I do, and I imagine I'm going to be doing these the rest of my life, actually. It started when I was in graduate school, and I'd been invited to come and work in the home of the parents of a friend. And they had some really interesting books. They weren't art collectors, they weren't people who were particularly involved in art, but I spent about a week in their house looking at their bookshelves and gradually came up with this system of organizing the books so that I could put them in a certain sequence and you could read the title on the spines in order. And that's basically the way I've been doing this project until now, when I had the opportunity to work with so many beautiful books that had such beautiful covers that I decided to put these books covers up. So the show here at the Delaware Art Museum is the first arranged that way.
Great. So what's the most exciting part about starting a new sorting and kind of getting your hands on a brand new collection?
There's a wonderful first phase where there's a lot of just looking and ogling of books. So I came here and I spent, I think, about a week just kind of looking through the stacks and pulling books out. I went through every single book in this collection, one at a time, and looked at the cover. And when I found a book that I liked, I would, using my camera phone, hold it up in my hand and take a picture of it, and wound up with an image archive of about, I think, 700 book covers that then I brought back with me to Brooklyn and continued to work with. So what you're seeing here is actually my kind of working methodology that allows me to work off-site and work with images, and where gradually these things kind of find their way into these clusters. I think I printed out about 700 or 800 book covers that I worked with. In between my visit last summer and my visit in December, when I came back to actually take the photographs of the books.
So it's sort of almost like you're taking the pictures. It kind of becomes a puzzle because you have them all actually laid out in front of you.
It does feel like a big puzzle. It sort of feels like something between a puzzle and a writing exercise, and even a little bit like writing lyrics to a song, where you kind of turn over words in your head until things just kind of find their rhythm and they find their place and they feel right. It's a really fun process, and I have spent more time than I ever have before doing one of these projects in this collection, which means I really know these books intimately at this point. I'm sad every time I have to say goodbye to them.
Yeah. You probably know them better than the rest of us at this point, since the collection's so new to everyone here. So, you know, a lot of collections are really personal, and I know that the way you group your title is sometimes they're humorous, sometimes they're very poetic and thoughtful. Mm-hmm. Do you base those groupings sometimes thinking about the personality of the collector, or do you kind of just get a sense of the books just purely as books, not from the person you think that might have collected them?
Right. Normally, I think of this as a portraiture project, ultimately. It's a project that, in one way or another, is trying to sort of sum up something about someone or some place, you could say too, perhaps. And this has been a very interesting version of this project for me, because I haven't actually been thinking so much about an individual. Mary Sawyer, who collected these books, was very interested in the covers and the designers and the sort of the look of these books, but they haven't really been collected on the basis of their content. And that means that as a portraiture project, it has become more about a certain slice of time in American history than it has about, in some ways, the person who collected these books. So that's been a first for me as well, and I think it's been really interesting to think about America between 1870 and 1920 and the kinds of changes that were happening in the country then, and how that's reflected in these covers, both in their visual appearance as well as in the content of the books.
And because the books are historical and a lot of them are maybe written in a way that we don't tend to write in today, can you talk about how putting words together from older books is different than maybe when you're working with modern books? It probably comes up with very different phrases.
There's a very different kind of grammar. I wonder if I can find a good example here somewhere. There's one category of books that I loved playing with, and one of the clusters that evolved for the show is taking advantage of this. Well, there'll be kind of a person's name and then the place that they're from. So we'll say, Sophie of Cravonia or Tristram of Blent or things like that. So a lot of books where the person's origin or where they are is sort of part of the convention of the book title and its naming. I have sometimes grouped these things a little bit around grammar. So there's a group somewhere where there's a sort of set of titles that start with a conjunction, and those are often very useful for me because I can link together other words and sentences through those kinds of titles. So there's a shift that you see too between the more somewhat more austere, or what's the right word for this, slightly sort of withholding, more Victorian sensibility in some of the book titles, and the slightly racier tone that comes into it by the time it's 1920. So there's one of the photographs that I took which contrasts a book called The Quiver of Love with one called 22 caliber varmint rifles, and that's a really good example of books from a very different period with a very different tone.
Shifting gears for a little bit, when you are sort of out in the real world, not in a library or in a book collection, do you see words and phrases on billboards and signs? Are you always kind of putting words and phrases together?
I have a brain that somehow likes to gather and categorize, yes, and a lot of processes that come into other kinds of projects are in some sense similar to the way this project gets made. And so, yes, I do feel very attuned to language in the world. I love instances of language in the world where language goes a little bit wrong, and actually New York City is a wonderful place to live with that in mind, because there are so many people there for whom English is not their first language, and they play kind of fast and loose with the English language, and I'm always fond of moments where English goes a little bit crazy. It's great.
And finally, what do you hope visitors will take away from this exhibition, whether they're book lovers or not?
I think we're at an interesting point in time with the book as a thing, actually. We read in so many different ways and in so many different contexts right now. I think that personally, I'm not someone who believes the book is ever going to go away, but I think we are going to start reading certain kinds of things on our screens, on our readers, on our phones, and other kinds of things we will save for the experience of actually holding a book. And I've been thinking a lot about that working with these books, because there is a very, very lovely and I think important experience about holding a material thing and reading that way. And so I hope that this project makes people aware of how important and how wonderful it is to have these sorts of objects around and the worth of preserving them. I think that it is a fantastic thing that this collection exists in this museum's library. I am full of admiration for Mary Sawyer for her efforts in gathering all these books over the years, and I think that it's a pretty good argument that kind of makes itself for the incredible ongoing allure of a physical book. And that said, I think that the great thing about new digital forms of books is that probably in some ways people read more than they used to. I think reading isn't going away, and I don't think books are going away either, but I think books are going to change.
Thank you.